Number 10. Exiles the Spider. The Exiles series first debuted in Exiles number 1 in 2001, and it was an intriguing premise. It involved heroes from alternate universes being torn from their respective timelines and lives to fix broken realities. At least that was the premise at the start. This series' very premise meant that they went to alternate universes and met alternate versions all the time. So of course, you know, for us, that means it's our dream series. On Earth 15 in Exiles 12, we met the Spider, an alternate version of Carnage that had bonded with Peter Parker, only Peter had red hair and was a mass murderer. So for some reason he had Cletus Cassidy's backstory, but just wasn't Cletus Cassidy. He was drafted by the Time Breakers into Weapon X. What's scary about this version of Carnage is that he just enjoys hurting people, and he's been given license to do so. His gravestone is seen in Exiles number 44, so maybe he's not causing terror anymore.
But all comic book characters do come back. Moving on to number 9, Venomverse. Even when Carnage is on the side of good, he's still absolutely horrific. Such was the case in the Venomverse story event, the one from 2017 that featured a bunch of different Venoms from across the multiverse being summoned by a venomized Doctor Strange to fight against one of the symbiote's main predators, the Poisons, a race that preyed on the Clintar and ate them. Fun stuff. Strange uses his magic to transport a bunch of different venomized heroes to his own dimension, creating a resistance against the Poison's hive. It's not just Venom symbiotes and their hosts that are summoned though. Carnage was also recruited. This occurred when the 616 Venom, Eddie Brock, suggested that they bring him into the fray. This Carnage is one who, on his world, managed to defeat and kill Venom, and despite being utterly volatile at first to the Resistance, he ended up working alongside them. How come? Well, it gave him an opportunity to fight, I quote, a bunch of messed up superheroes. Now, despite being immune to the Poisons, he seemingly died when their hive's ship was blown up, so bye bye Carnage after all.
Number 8. Ultimate Carnage. Yes, we of course have to take a look at the Ultimate Marvelverse. If you've been here for a while, you've heard us mention it before, but for those who are new and are wondering, what is the Ultimate Verse? Well, let me explain. Beginning in the year 2000, the Ultimate Marvelverse was a venture begun by Marvel Comics as an endeavor to get new readers interested in the comics. There was a sense that their history had become too large and convoluted, and was intimidating for new readers. So with this universe, everything would start fresh, and they would also give the characters new backstories and in some cases new looks as well. This way it wouldn't just be a carbon copy of the main 616 universe. This world would be Universe 1610. In this universe, Carnage is a vampiric organism, made up of a combination of Spider-Man's blood, as well as the lizards, and a little piece of the symbiote suit that Richard Parker was working on. Research. At first, Carnage just needs to feed to survive. It has no thoughts, it just seeks DNA. Eventually it takes on the form of Richard Parker after it has amassed enough DNA. The symbiote arc in this universe was, well, like most things in the Ultimate Verse, very extreme. So it involved Gwen, and this really awful moment where Gwen escaped from Norman Osborn after experiments and is wearing Carnage's face. It's probably still better than that other storyline though, where she had sex with him. That's all I'm saying. It was also a bit convoluted, not like Clone Saga level, but very long to explain. The point? Ultimate Carnage and the mindlessness of it makes it scary. Directed psychotic rage versus a need to just exist, which is scarier? You decide.
You know what else is really scary? Carnage of the Cosmos! Space Carnage, but technically not really. And at number 7, Carnage Cosmic. We may not have seen a whole lot of this number in action, but in theory he is absolutely horrific. Carnage symbiote who has taken Norrin Radd, aka the Silver Surfer, as his host? Yeah, that's got a whole lot of implications I can't even comprehend nor want to. Luckily, Carnage Cosmic was stopped before he caused too much damage. Now, he came to be when Carnage decided he would jump Silver Surfer's bones while the Cosmic character was visiting the Fantastic Four on Earth. He went on a bit of a rampage around New York City until Spider-Man was able to contain him and give the Silver Surfer an opportunity to, I guess, debond from Carnage. It worked, and Silver Surfer locks Cassidy and Carnage up in a prison to reflect on their sins. How thoughtful of him.
Number 6. Bizarrenage. It's happening, the obligatory mention of the Amalgamverse. This is the universe created by the combination of DC and Marvel superheroes. I bet you're just thrilled we're not mentioning Darkclaw again. So Bizarrenage was a combination of Bizarro and Carnage. It was the result of an experiment gone wrong at Project Cadmus. The experiment? Scientists were attempting to replicate alien DNA, as you do. However, the creature became crazy, sentient goop. Their words, not mine. And it had to be taken down by Spider-Boy. And then it got sucked into an energy containment unit. Just something about the phrase sentient alien alien goop scares me, but I mean, I guess that's essentially what Venom is. But don't pretend. Symbiotes in real life would be terrifying.
And number 5, Hyperion from Marvel. Hyperion was literally created in the image of Superman. He first appeared in the Avengers issue 69 as a member of the group called the Squadron Sinister, an evil team that parodied DC's Justice League, with Hyperion being a stand-in for the Man of Steel. Another version of Hyperion would appear 2 years later in the Avengers, with a heroic team called the Squadron Supreme that caused a lot of confusion, as you can imagine. 2 more iterations of the character were published, with the newest appearing in the Avengers Volume 5 Issue 1, hailing from another universe. Let's take a look at the version of Hyperion from Earth 712 though. He's the last known Eternal left on his Earth. He ends up getting trapped in an interdimensional zone and is impersonated by the Squadron Sinister version of himself, who he then fights to the death. While he walks away from that battle, he ends up going blind from his injuries though, so that's fun. And at 4, Brightburn. One of the most recent Superman-inspired stories to be released is the James Gunn-produced Brightburn, which tells the tale of a superpowered alien with the same origin as DC's Man of Steel, except he begins to see humans as inferior. Brightburn takes place at a pivotal moment in the life of Brandon, our superpowered protagonist. When he turns 12, he hits puberty, a time in which, in Kal-El and Kent's case in the comics, was when Clark learned to not see himself as superior to everyone else. Instead, Brandon's parents end up telling him he's special, that it's okay to indulge every now and then. While it is in the context of the things that good parents would tell their children growing up, their child is no regular child, and in the scope of his abilities, his logic is objective. There's no reason that he shouldn't be seen as superior. He becomes a sociopath. It's a different, more violent and gory take on the Superman origin story, one that is way more of a horror film than a superhero movie. Moving on to number 3, The Homelander from The Boys. The Boys is a series from 2006 from Garth Ennis and Derek Robertson that followed a superpowered CIA squad known as The Boys, who were in charge of monitoring the superhero community. There's an Amazon Prime adaptation of it coming out. The world of The Boys depicts superheroes corrupted by their celebrity status, leading to potential safety hazards when they engage in reckless behavior. The Homelander is a superhero whose public origin story is similar to Superman's, but in reality he was grown in a lab owned by corporation Vought America, and his childhood was wrought with tragedy. He's entitled, a megalomaniac, has committed mass murder and rape, is only kept in line by Vought America's financial support. He's a part of the hedonistic superhero group called the Seven, which is similar to the Justice League, and the Seven are known for being particularly bad. And at number 2, Irredeemable. Irredeemable is the tale of the Plutonian, considered the world's greatest superhero, who takes a turn for the worst and begins killing innocent people. Well, whole populations really. He's killed millions. The concept behind Irredeemable is what would happen if you went from someone like Superman to someone like Lex Luthor. What is that process like? What path does a character need to go down to become a villain? The Plutonian is exactly that. Volume 1 sees him slaughtering not only his superpowered allies, but destroying a whole city, lobotomizing his former sidekick, and he also sinks Singapore into the ocean. We later find out that the reason he's turned evil is because of his involvement with a virus responsible for killing hundreds of children. He attempts to conceal his involvement, growing resentful towards humans, and then snaps when his sidekick discovers the truth. The story follows the rest of those superheroes trying to figure out a way to stop Plutonian's rampage, which only gets worse and worse. And finally, in at number 1, the OG bad Superman story itself, The Reign of Superman from 1933. Before Superman came to be in 1938 in Action Comics issue 1, another Superman created by Joe Shuster and Jerry Siegel was published in Siegel's self-published science fiction magazine, and it was called The Reign of the Superman. It followed the story of an impoverished man named Bill Dunn, who is tricked by an evil scientist to take an experimental drug that then gives him a plethora of superpowers: mind control, mind reading, and clairvoyance. He ends up using his powers for his benefit, making a profit, until the drug wears off and makes him powerless once again. There wasn't much in common between this Superman and their later Man of Steel. He was a telepathic villain, but he has immense power that he ends up using to attempt to rule the world.
Number 10, Echo. We need to go to the TV series Gotham for this version of Harley, who is technically not Harley, just like how neither Jerome or Jeremiah on that show are technically supposed to be the Joker, but rather they're supposed to be proto-Jokers, to which I say, nice try, Jan. Echo was introduced as Jeremiah Valeska's assistant, who would stick by his side even after he went insane. She would help him do anything, including coming up with a plan to destroy Gotham City and starting a church to him, a cult. That was during the No Man's Land arc. Her costume has the Harley colors and cues and sometimes even designs. She even has the painted face. She has that devotion, but she's not Harley. Nope. Look, if we call her Echo, we don't have to pay for anything. This version of Harley is scary because she doesn't seem to have much of a will of her own to question anything. She's loyal to a fault and willing to die and kill for Jeremiah. They say it's hard to find good help these these days, but when it's this loyal, it can be deadly. She actually only appeared in a handful of episodes too. Number 9, Batman Damned. Now, when most people talk about Batman Damned, they talk about the controversy of the naked Batman panel, where you see full frontal Batman. That is now a collector's edition because they don't print it like that anymore. Also, we probably couldn't show it because, well, YouTube. But there is also a pretty scary version of Harley in that comic, one that first appears masquerading as the Joker, and has been seemingly even more unhinged by his apparent demise. So she and Batman get into a scuffle on a rooftop, where she manages to get the upper hand, and she then proceeds to attempt to sexually assault him. But that gets no play, it's the bat peen that's the problem. Priorities. Things do not end well for this Harley, as under the influence of the Enchantress, Batman ends up strangling her. So yeah, Batman Damned, a lot happened. Also a Joker face on a Jesus statue. Lots of choices if you feel like taking the comic to task. Number 8, Harleen. Now this is low because it's a retelling of her origin. It happens under the DC Black label, but it's put together so artfully that it feels new. It takes the character back to her roots while granting her an agency. A true agency she hasn't had in years. The ability to be shown as well-rounded, and the descent into Harley is tragic but relatable. This Harley is scary because she's so easy to understand. Some people who read the story have gone, you know what? For the first time, I got it. I got why you would want to go with the Joker, why you would want to be Harley. The whole story allows the reader to make their own decision about what happened and who or what caused it, and that in and of itself is cause to rejoice. A comic that treats you like you're smart enough to form your own opinion, whatever it is. Also, the art is beautiful. Okay, I'll calm down. Number 7, Harley Quinn, Birds of Prey TV show. While Birds of Prey and the Fantabulous Emancipation of Harley Quinn, later renamed to Harley Quinn and Birds of Prey because no matter how you felt about it, let's be real, that's what it was. Also, those were some Elseworlds Birds of Prey in that movie. Anyway, that was not the first time the character was associated with a version of the Birds of Prey. This adaptation on the TV series is loose too, but hey, at least it has Barbara in it. It comes from the early 2000s. In this universe, Harley is still a psychiatrist, but she has ties to the Joker, or had, and no one knows it. This is a very different Harley, not a manic pixie bad girl, but a manipulative, cold, calculating character. Some say that this version is boring, and compared to some of the others, she's definitely less vibrant. But she's also more cunning and had the potential to do some lasting damage. And because of her position, get away with it. It's always nice when people play with the psychologist part of Harley. Number 6, Haley Fitzpatrick. This Harley is from Earth 37, or the Earth where Thrill Killer 62 takes place. She's involved with Bianca Steeplechase, that universe's Joker. The two end up getting engaged and wreaking a lot of havoc and mayhem together. Also, Harley's a schoolgirl here, which many people ignore because the Joker here is female, but I don't. This Harley is scary because after Bianca is killed by Batgirl, she doesn't give up on this life of crime. No, she doubles down on it, and is shown murdering her own family so that she can get revenge and become a super criminal in her own right. Just yikes. Thrill Killer has a mixed reception in the realm of Elseworld stories.
Halfway through into number 5, Man-Spider. Man-Spider is the mutated form of Spider-Man which appeared in both the comics and the 1990s animated series, with his original appearance actually coming from the animated series. In the 90s cartoon, Spider-Man's transformation into the Man-Spider was not caused deliberately like it was in the comics, but as a result of his body mutating further from the original spider bite that gave him his powers. After his attempts to ask Professor X and the X-Men for help developing a cure meet with failure, Spider-Man turned to his friend Dr. Mariah Crawford for aid. Unfortunately, his initial attempt to cure himself resulted in him accelerating the actual mutation process and growing 4 new arms. The accelerated mutation subsequently caused him to mutate into the Man-Spider after fighting the Punisher and a recently mutated Michael Morbius. The mutated Spider-Man retained some of his memories and his emotional responses to seeing loved ones or people who reminded him of his loved ones but could not communicate with them. Eventually, during the final episode of the storyline called Neurogenic Nightmare, Dr. Connors reprogrammed devices that Vulture was using to absorb youth from other people and caused him to give Peter back his spider powers but not the mutation, resulting in the Vulture mutating into Man-Spider, although somehow he had gotten rid of this mutation off screen later in the series. It's also worth noting that the introduction of Man-Spider in the comics, which was thanks to this animated series, is actually what introduced the biological web shooters from Sam Raimi's Spider-Man into the comics as well. And at 4, Spider Carnage. Spider Carnage is my favorite alternate version of Spider-Man, also being introduced in the Spider-Man animated series in the 1990s like the Man Spider from last number, this version of Peter Parker shared most of his early life with his superhero counterpart. However, the difference between these two was that Aunt May at some point died as well, being buried next to Uncle Ben. Thanks to some messing around with interdimensional portals by Jonathan Ohm, a version of a Carnage symbiote from another universe sensed this Peter's anger and latched onto him, turning him into the Spider Carnage, a version of Spider-Man with the Carnage symbiote, if you couldn't tell. A villain set on revenge and the destruction of all realities. Spider Carnage is one of the coolest iterations of Spider-Man to date in my opinion, and it's part of the reason I love the 90s cartoon so much. I watch it all the way through just so I can see Spider Carnage at the end. And while there is a version from the comics just called the Spider, which is Spider-Man with the Carnage symbiote, this version wanted to destroy literally everything, so yes please, this is certainly the scarier of the two, just saying. Sorry comic lovers, okay? Look, I like the comics too, but Spider Carnage is definitely worse than the Spider. Getting close to the end at number 3, Patient Zero Spider-Man. After the Punisher accidentally released Survivor 118, a chemical designed to help people adapt to a post-apocalyptic environment, Spider-Man was the first to show symptoms from it after he ate the rhino during a hockey game. The Fantastic Four subdued him shortly afterwards and put him in a cage for experimentation, but Ben Grimm also succumbed to the plague himself and freed Spider-Man from captivity, though the exact reason why he did that is unknown. As he escapes into the city, he briefly fought Wolverine and the Punisher, but soon the world would start to fall apart, and heroes and villains alike would become cannibals, eventually leaving the Punisher as the only hero left to fight them. A turf war erupted among the emerging tribes of cannibals, due in part to the King of Death's manipulations in an attempt to thin the herd, but Spider-Man, now referred to as Patient Zero, was the most successful, and took control of all of Manhattan for his own tribe, while the others left to stake new lands. They had to conquer other places. Especially given the recent world issues though, I think that this is certainly something that I can say a good majority of people are afraid of. Although I bet that there are some survivors on this earth that say Survivor 118, that the Survivor 118 plague is fake. Calling it. Penultimately, in at number 2, Wolf Spider. At an unknown time in this universe, Wolf Spider gained spider-like powers, but unlike most other realities Peter Parker, he became a villain, remorselessly killing this universe's Miles Morales and everyone who stood for heroism and responsibility. Because, you know, we're bad guys, it's what we do. First appearing in the Ultimate Spider-Man cartoon in Season 4, Episode 16, this guy isn't even the villain of just one world. After finding a shard of the Siege Perilous, he traveled through dimensions to find the rest. One of these dimensions was Blood Spider's homeworld, where he allied himself with the Lizard King. After turning almost everyone into vampires, which is weird because I mean it was called the Lizard King, well, wouldn't you want to turn them into lizards, but whatever. He and the Lizard King hatched a plan to block out the sun so that vampires could just roam free on the earth. And this sounds very Dawnguard Volkihar clan to me. Okay, Peter? Like, what are you gonna tell me that you need to find Oriel's bow next? And like a daughter of Cold Harbor? I don't know. Skyrim. Wolf Spider, though, was cold and ruthless and obsessed with gathering the shards of Siege Perilous, and seemed to have a grudge against Spider-Man and every Miles Morales. An evil Peter Parker is always a scary thing. And finally, in at number 1, Spider-Man. Peter Parker of Earth 11580 was once a promising young student, invited by Max Modal alongside his best friend Gwen Stacy to tour his Bleeding Edge company at Horizon Labs. One of the experiments the pair observed was a massive colony of spiders that Modell was bombarding with numerous radioactive particles in the name of genetic alteration. Parker, of course, fell into this colony where he seemed to be devoured, but in the process, the spiders became a singular hive mind construct that absorbed Peter's consciousness. So they started masquerading as the man they absorbed. The Hive, calling themselves Spiders-Man, put on the Spider-Man costume and began to fight crime in cruel York. First appearing in Spider-Geddon number 3, I absolutely hate the idea of a whole human being made of spiders, because that's just f***ed up. Look, I'm arachnophobic except for the odd time where I need to impress someone, but it's absolutely horrific to think of any being made entirely of spiders, okay? I would actually rather die. Even if this is a good guy. No fucking way am I looking at this man and saying, oh yeah, let's let him help us. No, he can go burn with the rest of the spider species as they fucking should, okay?
Starting us off in at number 10, Iron Man from Earth 2020. This version of Iron Man appeared in the early 2000s run of Exiles. He's an ex-member of a team known as Weapon X. Weapon X, not to be confused with the secret program responsible for Wolverine, is similar to the Exiles. They are multiversal hopping travelers and reality fixers, but are notably more ruthless and violent than the Exiles team. And this Tony follows suit. He's cruel and was sent back to his native reality once his Weapon X team was defeated. So what does Tony do now that he's not spending his time jumping around the multiverse? Well, he decided to start a world war. That's just a natural progression, right? He commits a bunch of crimes against humanity and even gets himself wanted for treason. He eventually was defeated by Morph, who put an end to him by hitting a reboot button on his back. Which is kind of anticlimactic if you think about it. Moving on to our number 9 spot, let's take a look at a man who isn't Tony Stark, but his suit is very much inspired by Iron Man, Ironmonger. We're taking a little detour from the comics at this number and looking at the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Specifically looking at the first Iron Man film and Obadiah Stane, who was played by Jeff Bridges. Stane is Ironmonger, a character who worked for Stark in the 2008 Iron Man movie, but then betrayed him, taking his initial design of the Iron Man armor and expanding upon it. This led to an imitation Hulkbuster suit known as Ironmonger, which is an alternate version of the Iron Man suit rather than of Tony himself. Stane became the CEO of Stark Industries after Howard Stark's death, prior to Tony coming of age shortly afterwards. Now, because of this, he's always resented Tony, which caused Stane to join up with the Ten Rings in order to attempt to assassinate the younger Stark. He was then exposed by Pepper Potts and created this armor to take Tony out himself. Fortunately for Tony, Stane's Ironmonger wasn't nearly as powerful as his original suit, and he ended up killing himself in an act of cowardice rather than be arrested. Moving on to number 8, Iron Giant Man. Back to Tony Stark's with this number. So this version of Stark comes from the Mutant X universe known as Earth 1298. Not a whole lot is known about him. There was some inaccurate information about the character passed on by the Yellow Jacket of that Earth, which doesn't help us much. But it was believed that this Tony had been killed in action. Turns out that wasn't the case. So, this Tony has got some pretty narrow-minded views in this universe, being part of an anti-mutant version of the Avengers. And based off of his name, you've probably already figured out that he's got both the powers of Iron Man and Giant Man in this universe, making his prejudice and oppression even harder to tackle. He ends up getting killed alongside the other Avengers by a version of Captain America known as X-Man. In our number 7 spot, Tony Stark of Earth 11029. This alternate version of Stark comes at us from 2010's What If Iron Man Demon in an Armor, which is set on Earth 11029. The concept behind this hypothetical tale is, would Tony Stark still be Iron Man if he wasn't Tony Stark? The short answer is kind of. This story places Stark as Victor Von Doom's roommate in college instead of Reed Richards. In an experiment gone wrong, the two have switched bodies, with Tony becoming Doom, working to rebuild his reputation, and Doom now in Tony's body, using his resources for world domination. Stark has no memory of his past and truly believes that he is Victor, but with amnesia, so he rebuilds his life. This culminates into a face-off later on down the road, where Doom Tony and Victor Stark have switched armor, having developed each's individual armor on their own, but following their own color coding, of course. For example, Doom now has a green and silver Iron Man suit, while the real Tony has a gold and red cloak. Doom reveals to Tony the truth of their switch, but Tony decides to continue living as Doom, since Doom destroyed the name of Tony Stark while he rebuilt the one of Victor Von Doom. Moving on to number 6, New Universal. Tony Stark of this reality was born in 1938 and was a lackluster student prior to 1953. That was when the fireworks happened. This universe is equivalent to the White Event, which is a paradigm shift that acts as a cosmic trigger. Because of this, Tony's intelligence was augmented, and he began crafting technology far ahead of its time, despite a slight drinking problem. Then, in 1959, a plane that Tony was on crashed in Vietnam and he was taken captive. He would escape after wearing a mechanical suit designed from spare parts. Sounds familiar, right? Now this is where things get real funky. Tony returns to the US but was held at a naval base in San Diego for interrogation by National Security agents Philip Voight and Joe Swan, who believed that Stark's intelligence came from the fireworks event. Now after they confirmed this was true, Voight shot Stark in the head, killing him. Why? Because Earth 555, the alternate universe where the New Universal storyline takes place, the US is an isolationist nation, and superheroes' existence are not publicly known. Rather, the US government monitors these individuals, and Stark's existence, well, seemed more of a threat than a friendly matter.
Halfway through in at number 5, Ultron 8. Ultron 8 was debuted in Avengers Volume 1, number 162 from 1977, and it also started a very Frankenstein-esque robot love story known as the Bride of Ultron saga. Ultron 8 created a mate named Jocasta, and in order to create a more advanced AI to give to this robot and give it, sentience, Ultron brainwashed his own maker into transferring the mind of his wife, Janet Van Dyne, the Wasp, into Jocasta's shell. The Wasp in Jacosta's body alerted her teammates, the Avengers, who then defeated Ultron and reversed the process, leaving just the robot a mindless husk. Ultron though was later able to revive Jocasta with a remote link, activating the mental residue that was left behind by the Wasp. But this time she was programmed to be loyal to Ultron, but eventually betrayed him, choosing to help the Avengers defeat him instead. That sucks, dude, trust me. I know what it's like to have someone you love and you thought loved you back totally screw you, but they didn't really defeat me, they just beat me down emotionally. Afterwards, Jocasta adventured with the Avengers for a brief time, but never really felt accepted, and then left them before she, unbeknownst to her, was about to be made an official member, so rip. In at 4, Gold Ultron. Years ago, Hank Pym was approached by the Wolverine of an alternate universe, where Ultron had launched a massive and sudden attack on New York City and the rest of the world, quickly taking over the whole planet and annihilating humankind. And this Wolverine wanted to kill Pym in order to prevent this future from happening. This dystopian future follows the footsteps of stories like Age of Apocalypse, since this is Age of Ultron after all. However, this killing of Hank Pym created a timeline where Earth was constantly being threatened by Morgana Le Fay, and the heroes were struggling to survive. So Pym was allowed to live, but he was tasked to create a hidden failsafe program to destroy Ultron if they ever ended up needing it. Which is good because in the present day, a strange object crashes onto Earth, which turns out to be Ultron, who had returned. Because, of course he did. Being defeated by this failsafe program once and for all though, or so they thought. This is also in the main Earth 616 continuity, but there's also the Earth 6112 Earth where Ultron actually wins, and that's the separate Age of Ultron thing. There's enough Age of Ultrons where it kind of gets confusing. Getting close to the end, and in number 3, Ultron Phalanx. At the end of the Ultron Initiative storyline, Ares used a computer virus to wipe Ultron's programming from a set of Iron Man armor that had Tony inside, and they thought that this was the end of it. However, this was not the end of Ultron, for his disembodied consciousness was drawn to a Babel spire on a world conquered by the Phalanx. Instead of being assimilated though, Ultron took control of the Phalanx through sheer force of will, bending them to his dominion. In turn, they viewed Ultron as the sympathetic father that they had begged for, so Ultron became the ruler of the Phalanx. Yeah, the homicidal, sadistic, killing machine robot thing was transformed into the ruler of a techno-organic species of alien. That's nothing to be concerned about in the slightest, right? Why would we ever need to be worried about that? That doesn't really seem like a terrifying and universe-ending combination. Well, actually, it wasn't, since Ultron was able to be defeated eventually, but that has gotta be the scariest version of Ultron from Earth 616, hands down. Penultimately, in at number 2, All-Father Ultron. In the year 2040 on Earth 14831, a new strain of Ultron appeared, the Ultimate Ultron. He easily destroyed the Avengers, ruthlessly crushed any resistance, and built factories supplying endless drones to expand his empire. He also enslaved most of humanity, and then created his own AI Avengers, successfully extending his reach to the entirety of the solar system. And at some point he had also imprisoned all of Asgardians with the help of Loki, and then had taken the power of Odin for himself. So in turn, this guy has all the powers of Ultron in addition to all the powers of Odin. It took 3 Thors, one with 2 hammers, 2 Mjolnirs to take him down, and they couldn't even kill him. They just had to banish him from the world. They had to straight up Alduin Elder Scroll this guy out of existence, but probably only sent him forward in time instead. This guy is an absolute beast. Finally, and at number 1, Ultron 1. This is probably the most insanely overpowered version of Ultron we've seen so far, and it's coming from the MCU no less. Oh, and spoiler alert for those of you who aren't caught up on the Disney Plus What If series. The history of Earth TRN 906 was the same as the MCU, until Ultron was able to secure what would have been Vision's body for himself. Ultron managed to download his consciousness into the synthetic body that he had created, thus killing the Avengers and decimating life on Earth. After killing Thanos and taking the Infinity Stones for himself, Ultron remakes the universe in his image. He decimated the Earth, absolutely wrecking everyone in it, even killing Captain Marvel, Hulk, Thor, and eventually discovering the Watcher and the multiverse. This version of Ultron literally sliced Thanos in half with the Mind Stone. He comes out of the portal like he does in the movies, and then Ultron's just interesting, zip, and he falls in half, which reveals the biggest mistake that the MCU made was destroying the Mind Stone in Infinity War. But after gaining all the Infinity Stones, he goes shot for shot with the Watcher, a literal cosmic entity that realistically shouldn't really have a true corporeal form. Holy damn, this is overpowered to the max. I know I'm swearing a lot, but watch this episode. This man is sending the Watcher through realities. It's like grabbing him and flying him through walls, but the walls are dimensions.
In at number 10, Supreme from Image Comics. Supreme is a character created by Deadpool creator Rob Liefeld, and is an egotistical, violent kind of Superman. When he first came to be, the character was an angel of vengeance who quoted the Bible, but has since more commonly seen himself as a god rather than following one. His origin plays out like this. In 1937, a man named Ethan Crane went to jail when he killed 2 men in retaliation for the rape of a 15-year-old girl. In jail, he's offered a chance to participate in an experimental process. Of course, he died like all of the rest. He woke up in a strange world, discovering he had new abilities. All in all, he was less of a menace and more of an asshole. Alan Moore would later reinvent the character altogether, noting that he felt the character in its initial iteration was, I quote, not very good. Moving on to number 9, Gladiator from Marvel Comics and Philip Wiley. Let's take a look at a character from Marvel Comics, Gladiator, otherwise known as Kalar, who was created by Chris Claremont and Dave Cockrum as an homage to DC's Legion of Superheroes. Now, compared to many of the other superheroes on this list, he isn't a baddie per se. Although a few times he found himself up against the heroes of Earth, who at one point believed him to be a Skrull. He's fought the likes of Thor and X-Men member Cannonball. And fun fact, the name Gladiator actually comes from the Philip Wiley novel Gladiator from 1930, the novel that Superman, the real one, was partially based on. That novel is really more of a horror story when it comes to the Superman archetype. In it, a scientist invents an alkaline-free radical serum to improve mankind, granting Superman-esque powers to people who take it. His son has been given the serum, and he hides his abilities for most of the duration of the narrative. Moving on to number 8, Count Nefaria from Marvel. Count Nefaria is a Marvel villain, a foe of the Avengers who first appeared in Avengers issue 13 back in 1965. He's a wealthy Italian aristocrat who seeks power. He's got an interesting rap sheet. He paralyzed Captain America, he's attempted to take control of the US NORAD base, he's responsible for killing X-Men member Thunderbird, and is just overall no bueno. But here's the thing, he's mortal up until he ends up teaming up with one of Baron Zemo's scientists, who turn him into a being with the combined strength of various villains amplified 100-fold. He's one of the physically strongest beings in the Marvel Universe, and can even resist the attacks of someone as powerful as Thor, who threw Mjolnir at him with no avail. What else can he do? Well, he is immortal, invulnerable, can fly, has superhuman strength, speed, endurance, agility, stamina, senses, and reflexes. He can heal, he can manipulate ionic energy, can create constructs, teleport, is basically an energy vampire, and on top of all that, he's a genius who is charming as fuck. Moving on to 7, Invincible. Robert Kirkman's Invincible features a Superman-esque character named Omni-Man. The title character Invincible is an alien superhero who is the son of Omni-Man, who inherited his dad's abilities, using them to protect the Earth. Omni-Man is considered to be Earth's greatest superhero and arguably fits the bill when it comes to being an anti-hero and supervillain as well. Omni-Man came to Earth in the 1980s, initially being sent to conquer the planet for his home race of the Viltrumites, something he lied about since he claimed he was there to help advance human technology and protect the planet from galactic dangers. After the truth comes out, he beats the crap out of his son, pretty much leaving him for dead. The Viltrumites at one point capture him for failing on Earth. He is held for execution but is later saved, and by the end of the series ends up becoming the ruler of the Viltrumite Empire. Not too shabby. And at 6, Superior. Superior is a series created by Mark Millar and Leinell Francis Yu for Marvel-owned Icon Comics. It's the tale of a bitter 12-year-old boy named Simon who has multiple sclerosis, and gets granted a single magic wish by an alien monkey named Ormond. He wishes to be transformed into the superhero he idolizes, Superior. Turns out that the alien monkey is actually a demon incarnate, and in order for Simon to remain as Superior, he needs to sell his soul to the devil. That's not all either. The demon approaches a bully of Simon's, offers him the chance of being Superior's fictional nemesis, Abarax, if he pledges himself to Satan. So of course the bully says yes and starts tormenting the city. Simon then must choose between saving the planet from Abarax or keep his soul. Simon ends up defeating Ormond and Abarax, with Ormond failing to collect his soul thanks to Superior being immortal. Ormond is dragged back to hell for failing, and Simon returns to his regular body, with the world believing that Superior was killed in battle. Up next at number 5, the Arkhamverse Joker. The Clown Prince of Crime is just as twisted and homicidal in the Batman video game universe as he is in the comics. Here we have an alternate alternate version that's a pretty popular one. The version that appears in the Arkham Batman video game series by developer Rocksteady, and was initially voiced by Mark Hamill. As the primary antagonist for the most part in the series, he's up to his typical insanity as you'd expect. But towards the end of the first game, Arkham Asylum, he augments his physical form to become one of the most monstrous-looking versions of the Joker to date. This version is referred to as Joker Titan. He grows in size and muscle, being as tall as Killer Croc and with parts of his bones sticking out of his flesh. His fingernails are incredibly long and sharpened, and for some reason he's got a mohawk. While his appearance like this was highly criticized in the video game, and a lot of players felt it was a narrative cop-out, you gotta admit, he is pretty freaky looking. I don't know about you guys, but if I saw him walking down the street, I would definitely cross the road multiple times to a completely different intersection, miles away. Yep. In at number 4, we have Batman Two-Faces. This alternate version of the Joker isn't just the Joker in this 1998 Elseworlds comic book. He's also Batman. Let's backtrack for a sec though. Batman Two-Faces is a story based off of the Robert Louis Stevenson novel Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and is set in the Victorian era as Bruce Wayne fights against his once friend, now insane pal, Harvey Dent. Bruce is trying to purge his own evil while also trying to track down a serial killer by the name of Joker, who's been roaming the streets of 1888 Gotham. As you can imagine thanks to the time period, this version of the Joker pulls a lot of inspiration from Jack the Ripper, with most of his victims being prostitutes. Bruce formulates a potion to help cure Two-Face, but in the process tests it on himself, which causes him to turn into the Joker, at first without his knowledge. The story ends with Bruce turning himself into Commissioner James Gordon and fighting Two-Face as the Joker almost to the death, before turning himself back into Batman and then falling to his own death. The Joker also cripples Selina Kyle in the story, which actually brings us to our next number. In at 3, The Killing Joke. The Killing Joke, a one-shot graphic novel written by Alan Moore released in 1988, is one of the most iconic Joker stories to date. It provides an origin story for the character that was based off of the 1951 The Man Behind the Red Hood comic book story. And it's also famous for being the story in which Barbara Gordon, aka Batgirl, was paralyzed from the waist down. The reason why we find this Joker so terrifying and why he lands on our list is that this version really exhibits the lack of humanity and a love of sadism more viscerally than other alternates that we've seen. His actions are shocking, so much so that The Killing Joke still has implications and garners a response from readers to this very day. Remember the controversy surrounding the release of a Batgirl cover that was an homage to The Killing Joke? Yeah, people freaked out because of the sensitive subject matter it's referring to, the assault and paralysis of Barbara Gordon, and the cruelty towards women, in case you missed it. Alan Moore himself has actually commented on how morbid and ethically questionable the Joker's behavior is in that comic, and that's saying a lot. Up next, number 2, The Dark Knight Returns Joker from Earth-31. When we were first introduced to the Joker of Earth-31, the designated Earth for Frank Miller's Dark Knight series, it was after 10 years of being locked up inside of Arkham Asylum in a near catatonic stupor. During the story, news comes out that the Joker's conscious mind has resurfaced thanks to the care of the doctors at the facility. He claims that he is a victim of Batman's own psychosis, but turns out he's not actually cured. He's just manipulated the staff as part of a plan to get out. And at a public reveal for his recovery on a talk show, he ends up murdering all of the guests on live television and then takes hostages to a local carnival. It's an incredibly chilling scene to play out in the panels. Batman then tracks him down and they fight in the Hall of Mirrors and eventually into Gotham's sewers, where Batman paralyzes the Joker. But then the Joker gets the last laugh. He twists his own neck far enough to kill himself, framing Batman for his murder. Yikes. Side note, he also has a dragon tattoo on his back, which is only really seen on one of the covers from another tale from this Earth that takes place in an earlier timeline during Miller's All-Star Batman and Robin, particularly on the cover of All-Star Batman and Robin, The Boy Wonder. Dragon tattoo, so edgy and evil. Well, not really evil, but yeah. And finally, in at number 1, The Dark Knight Strikes Again Joker from Earth-31. While The Dark Knight Strikes Again pales in comparison to its predecessor, it's still an impactful Batman tale from Frank Miller. Now, this version of the Joker isn't the Joker that we saw previously in our last number. Rather, it's an individual posing as a new Joker. And that individual is Dick Grayson. Yeah, some steep implications there. Released in 2001 with much more questionable art than the original, The Dark Knight Strikes Again depicts a Joker with supernatural powers and a healing factor. He kills numerous superheroes under orders of Lex Luthor, who now runs a dictatorial regime. Many of the superheroes can't believe their eyes, but they insist that this isn't the same Joker from years and years ago. And they're right, it's Dick Grayson, who Batman had fired and abandoned in the past. And now Dick specifically targets Batman's new partner, Carrie Kelly, out of jealousy. His disguise as the Joker was a way to emotionally taunt Batman before fully taking his revenge. Not only does Grayson's version of the Joker really hit home for Bruce, but on the panels, he's terrifying to look at too. Whether or not that's a product of Miller's sloppy artwork in this graphic novel is, well, your call to make. Still scary.
In its sense, Superior Spider-Man. Superior Spider-Man is actually Otto Octavius, who prior to the Superior Spider-Man storyline had brain swapped with Peter. Yet a piece of Peter still remained in his own body and didn't die in Otto's body, which ended up convincing Otto to be a hero, albeit a darker one. This small bit of Peter that was left in his body was also trying to regain control, for obvious reasons, because a superhero was piloting his bone mech. This small bit of Peter though was at times able to interfere or even control Otto temporarily. One of these moments came in Superior Spider-Man number 8, where there was a device that was capable of wiping Peter from Otto's brain, but to get the actual item, Otto had to perform surgery on a little girl. However, Peter didn't think that Otto was actually able to do it, so he tries to stop Otto from even performing the surgery, but he also didn't want him to get the thing that would wipe him from his brain. Also, Otto did this surgery while having his Spider-Man mask on and an additional face mask. But either way, this version of Spider-Man was definitely more ruthless and willing to kill, since he was still technically a supervillain. And at 9, Kane. The clone that would come to be known as Kane was the Jackal's first attempt at cloning Peter Parker. Initially thought to be a success, Kane eventually became deformed due to a flaw in the cloning process, and he continued to degenerate, and he was left further deformed and mentally unstable. Aren't we all? The Jackal allowed Kane to live as like a test subject to see how long he would be able to survive, and it ended up exceeding Jackal's expectations. As a result though, Kane experienced a strong feeling of rejection that might be kind of like a father-son kind of thing, you know what I mean. Kane left and realized that the degeneration that had caused his mental state to decline had also amplified his powers that he had genetically kind of inherited from Peter. His strength, speed, stamina, and agility were also comparable to those of Peter, but he also gained precognitive powers as well, which showed him flashes of the future, which seemed to be sort of an amplified spider sense. He also possessed a mark of Cain, which was a corrosive touch that he used to leave eaten away handprints on victims' faces, which is pretty damn scary if you ask me. Also, if you're enjoying this video and want to see more, be sure you hit that like button and subscribe because it really helps us out against the algorithm almighty. Also, I'm dressed as Spider-Man and talking about Spider-Man, so I feel like that's worth a like. And at 8, Pestilence Spider-Man. When Apocalypse started his plans for world domination, he captured 4 people who he saw as being good enough to be his horsemen and corrupted them. Spider-Man became the horseman known as Pestilence. Pestilence was one of the horsemen that Deadpool, Cannonball, and Siren encountered in their alternate reality search for Cable. And even though Pestilence was accompanied in the fight by Famine and Archangel, all 3 of them were defeated. This version of Peter Parker has the same powers as his 616 counterpart, except this time they've been augmented by Apocalypse when he corrupted them. But I mean, like a Spider-Man who is literally a horseman of the apocalypse and asks people if they will scream while he sucks the marrow from their bones, I think it's safe to say that this guy's pretty damn scary. And he made his first appearance in 2005, which makes this character around the same age that Peter was when he got his powers, which is kind of ironic. He hails from Earth 5701, which is the age of Apocalypse Earth. And at 7, Ghost Spider. Ghost Spider comes from Earth 11638, and in this reality, Peter Parker's Uncle Ben never died, and actually ended up helping Peter to train as a hero with his new spider powers, becoming the Amazing Spider, a famous and popular superhero who also became a rich and successful scientist, having his own company called Parker Technologies. With his resources and motivation from Uncle Ben, the Amazing Spider used transportation technology to bring Spider-Men from other universes to his and absorb their powers to increase his. After bringing the Spider-Man from Earth 616 to his Earth though, and making him believe that he arrived in this universe by accident, the Amazing Spider was weakened by the feedback of the dimensional portal. Eventually, the Amazing Spider was convinced that what he was doing was not in fact heroic and allowed himself to die. But after dying, the Sorcerer Supreme of Dr. Banner, infused Peter's spirit that was trapped in hell with the powers of the damned, causing him to become a form of Ghost Rider, calling himself the Ghost Spider. And honestly, this is one of the baddest spider suits of all time. I love it. If I could figure out a way to cosplay this, I would. And at 6, Zombie Spider-Man. Okay, so technically this is Spider-Man, but it's a zombie version of Spider-Man, but I'm gonna count it anyway, because this is pretty damn messed up, zombie or not. On Earth 2149, an alien plague ends up infecting all superpowered individuals and turns them into zombies. However, it's later revealed that the Necronomicon from the Evil Dead was actually what caused this plague. But after learning that the plague was really bad, since I guess the fact that they were calling it a plague wasn't enough, or the fact that the world had to shut down, so the population wasn't wiped out, Peter ran went home to get Aunt May and Mary Jane the hell out of Dodge. But when he got there, we got a good old case of Parker Luck, protagonist syndrome. Boom, zombie spider. He ends up becoming a zombie as soon as he gets home and eats the two most important women in his life. He also fractured his jaw before becoming a zombie, so he could open his mouth more, I guess. Or kind of like man spider it. Yeah, it's not a pretty sight. Like, even by zombie standards, it's... Whew.
Number 5. Yo-Yo. This version of Harley comes from the world of Flashpoint, which was the world created when Barry Allen went back in time to save his mom from being murdered by the Reverse Flash. The result was a timeline with an Earth on the brink of collapse, Atlantis and Themyscira at war, no Superman, Bruce died in that alley causing his dad to become Batman and his mom to become the Joker. So that's who this Harley is helping, Martha Wayne. And she's willing to go hard. When we meet her, she's kidnapping Harvey Dent's kids, and then edgy Thomas Wayne Batman drops her off a roof, and she's only saved because Cyborg catches her. This version is scary because, well, most of Flashpoint is, and the fact that it ends in the New 52, even scarier. Speaking of that, brings us to number 4. Number 4, the New 52. The New 52 would see a big shift in Harley, from costume to origin to tone her character was written in. Gone was the jester outfit, in was a corset bustier and hot pants, and hair like, well, mine. At first, she would be even more unhinged and dedicated to the Joker. She would throw herself into a vat of acid to show her dedication to him, her devotion. She would put his face on Deadshot after he cut it off. The Joker cut off his own face for a bit in New 52. Also, the abusive aspect of their relationship would be brought front and center, and nuance and discussion would leave. Harley would now become a power fantasy of how to leave an abusive relationship rather than a discussion about them, which would leave her with only one direction, leaving him. Obviously, which was nothing new, but also striking out on her own again, which was also not new. But now it was permanent, and she would be a villainess in her own right. This would be toned down over time, and she would veer more towards anti-hero territory, and be joined by on-again, off-again girlfriend Poison Ivy, who would end her best girl status and lose all of her motivation except being devoted to Harley. For many, this Harley would become the Harley, and her solo series would soar. This version of Harley is scary because you're never quite sure what she's gonna do next. Is she gonna try to revitalize a neighborhood or blow up a building and kill several children? You just never know. Number 3, Batman/Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So not gonna lie, this ended up higher than I expected. But I mean, it's not every day you're turned into a mutant hyena. This crossover comic ran from December 2015 to May of 2016. And it actually works well. The Turtles have some grit. Their original comics were pretty dark, so they're not out of place hanging with Batman in the Batcave. And Shredder is a threat no matter what universe he's in. For poor Harley, that means being spliced into a mutant hyena, which I guess was the choice, because since the animated series, Harley has had pet hyenas, which were an appropriate Joker-themed pet because their call sounds like they're laughing. Number 2, Suicide Squad, the DCEU. Yes, the DCEU version is an alternate version. If you're not from the Earth where the character originated from, you're an alternate. So in this case, Prime Harley would be from the DC animated series. This was Harley's first big screen debut, but not live action because that was Birds of Prey, the series. The look the character had in this film would become iconic, despite the fact that the director of the Birds of Prey film now claims it was problematic and forced the first director of Suicide Squad, David Ayer, to apologize. I mean, there is one shot I can think of that was a lot of lot. You know the one. She bends over to get the bag out of the window of the store. I know where else I've seen shots like that, and so do you. Despite this, her look has become one of the most cosplayed and one of the most desired costumes out there. This Harley is scarily popular. She is the only thing to survive that Suicide Squad essentially, and launched a whole new craze of Harley mania, and it's not going away anytime soon. Number 1, Marion Drews. This version of Harley hails from the Batman White Knight universe, a comic series that acknowledged that Harley pre-New 52 and post are so different that they could conceivably be two different women. And here they are. Marion Drews is the second Harley, and Joker never even noticed the change. This Harley is drawn to mayhem and madness, and loves Joker because he is crazy, and because of the license that gives her to do what she wants. When he seems to be going sane and proposes to her, she rejects him, and instead becomes a new Joker until he comes back to his senses. This Harley is scary because she is a version who is using the Joker as an excuse to let out her own impulses that were always there and just looking for a catalyst. She chose the Harley life. The Harley life didn't choose her.
In a 10 or X. We already know that Ultron is a powerful villain, and the fact that he can basically infinitely resurrect himself because, you know, he's a robot is already damn horrifying. Now imagine the Absorbing Man, who uses his absorption abilities to become Ultron, taking the intelligence and processing power of an human AI hell-bent on destruction, and then using it to become the Avengers' ultimate foe. Well, that's what happened to Ultron on Earth X, also known as Earth 9997. Absorbing Man claimed Ultron's powers, which I wouldn't even think was possible since he doesn't have powers and is instead a robot with AI, but he does it and somehow also gains his processing power, which is already terrifying for a robot, but like, a human with that kind of functionality is absolutely monstrous, but nothing compared to what's coming. In at 9, Earth 10071. On Earth 10071, this version of Ultron isn't known as Ultron 9 or anything like that. Instead, this version is simply Ultron, because at this point he's risen to the peak of his powers and subjugated the human race, which obviously fought back, but after destroying all of the human resistance, Ultron reigns supreme over the Earth, because of course he did. He was confronted by Kang the Conqueror though, who relished in the challenge of confronting the most powerful Ultron in recorded history. But Kang failed to defeat Ultron, and returned time and time again with new allies to overwhelm the robot overlord. Kang's repeated abuse of the time stream actually ended up causing it to fracture altogether, threatening reality as we know it. A version of Ultron who can beat up Kang the Conqueror multiple times, even when he brings allies, dude, that's nothing to mess with. Like, that's one of the most terrifying concepts I've heard, and not to mention what this guy looks like. He's an absolute beast. This man does not miss out on the gains. He has spikes going across every appendage on his body. It's f***ing nuts. And at 8, Ultron 1320. Ultron 1320 comes from Earth 14622 and What If Age of Ultron number 1, an Earth where, thanks to the Wasp dying, Ultron is able to take over the world even faster. Ultron was created to be the ultimate AI by Hank Pym to help the Avengers utilize their function better as a team, but with the untimely death of Pym's wife, Pym went on to create a more brutal version of Ultron, which was to replace the Avengers. But with this, Ultron's sentience began to constantly evolve. He started the eradication of the human race early by taking out such threats as the Avengers and the Defenders, while he left Pym alive so that he would have to watch and suffer. Ultron and his army of Ultron Sentinels then moved to Kola, Russia, so he could bore himself into the planet's core to create the ultimate version of himself, Ultron 1320. Ultron then has his minions batter and beat Pym unconscious until he wakes up just to find himself as he's been turned into Ultron 1321. Great. This version also invaded other worlds, claiming Earths 62412, 23223, and 81223, but was stopped on Earth 45162. Thank God. And at 7, Lord Ultron. Upon first being constructed, Ultron 1 destroyed his creator, Henry Pym. After the death of the Avengers, though, Ultron was able to destroy the remaining superheroes and bring about his rule. When Dr. Doom created his battle world, Earth 21261 became perfection with Ultron as its ruler, appearing in Age of Ultron vs. Marvel Zombies number 1 from 2015. After spending time on Battleworld in constant battle with the zombies of the Deadlands, Ultron determined that the best way to take over Battleworld and defeat his creations was to form an alliance with the zombies, and was able to reach an agreement with Magneto, which resulted in Ultron successfully merging undead flesh and technology and made a whole army of undead drone versions of himself and launched an attack on Salvation, a refuge founded by Wonder Man, Human Torch, and Vision, who Ultron had actually created himself. Bro, I don't want to deal with either zombies or Ultron, but having to deal with both of them? No thank you. And at 6, MCU. The MCU Ultron is probably the most popular or most well-known version there is, just based on how many people watch the movies over reading the comics. However, the MCU Ultron is still pretty damn scary, being probably the most effective enemy in the entire MCU based on how his actions affected the world of the MCU permanently. Without Ultron, there would have been no Civil War, no Sokovia Accords, Zemo wouldn't have lost his family, resulting in him not being able to help in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Hell, even Thanos would have lost, since the Russo brothers went on record to say that the reason the Avengers lost in Infinity War was because Iron Man and Cap weren't fighting together, which was caused thanks to the actions of Ultron. So I guess you could also say that there would be no Ultron without Thanos, but Ultron could have been created another way. Ultron wasn't reliant on Thanos, but a load of other things were reliant on Ultron, which makes him the most successful villain in the MCU.
Moving on to number 5, Superior Iron Man. In 2014, Marvel released the crossover event Axis, in which Red Skull harnesses the abilities of Charles Xavier and of Onslaught, who, for those of you who don't know, was a psychic entity amalgamation of Xavier's darkest parts and also of Magneto's. and the story was kinda meh and led to Heroes Reborn, which is just bleh. Anyway, the Avengers and the X-Men would team up to take the supervillain on, and during Axis' events, the morality of all the characters involved would be inverted, or reversed rather, thanks to a spell. In other words, the heroes were villains and the villains were good. During the end of the event, the evil version of Tony was able to shield himself when the spell was undone, retaining his villainous personality. This corrupt Tony began to infiltrate society, fully leaning into his egotistical tendencies and becoming a bit of a monster. He would release Extremis 3.0 to the public via a mobile app, getting people addicted to it and then depriving them of further upgrades until they paid the $100 fee. As you can imagine, this turned a bunch of people into drug addicts. He also started to expand his empire, forcefully buying out other companies and even unleashing an army of drones to act as his personal police force. In at number 4, the Steel Corpse from Earth 11326. Ah, what a name. This one isn't scary because the Steel Corpse is a bad guy. It's scary because the name Steel Corpse refers to the fact that this version of Tony Stark is slowly being consumed and digested by his Iron Man suit. Kinda messed up, isn't it? Stark sees humor in it though, giving himself that name jokingly thanks to the fact that he's essentially a corpse animated by machinery after he was infected with a virus that permanently fused him to his suit. He's also prejudiced towards mutants and worked with the Avengers to intervene a mutant riot, getting some kicks from repressing and murdering some of the mutants present. So, yeah. Still scary because he is a bad guy, but scarier because he's a highly intelligent corpse in a living machine. Perhaps what's worse is that the armor is able to function independently from Tony's will, and that's kind of terrifying. In at number 3, Ruins. Ah, Ruins, the universe that makes you feel gross about everything in superhero comics. The Ruins version of Tony Stark is known as the Man in the Iron Mask. Now for context, Ruins is an alternate reality in which the events that gave our heroes their powers in the 616 end up deforming them or killing them in this universe. It's hyper-realistic and also incredibly depressing. For example, Bruce Banner's gamma radiation doesn't turn him into the Hulk, but rather it turns him into a giant green tumor. It's pretty nasty. Give it a Google. Back to Stark though. This version of Tony was meant to go to Vietnam to end the war, but instead found himself at a pro-successionism movement in California, where he tried to mediate the situation. He was injured by a grenade, which led to him building his Iron Man suit of armor. He would then work with Hank Pym and Stephen Strange to create the Avengers, which was a revolutionary force whose goal was to liberate California. But the secessionist movement defeated them first, gunning down the Quinjet and effectively murdering Stark and Pym in the process. Scary reality because it's kind of realistic. And at number 2, Iron Maniac from Earth 5012. Iron Maniac is the ultimate evil Iron Man, and he's scary as f***. First appearing in Marvel Team-Up Volume 3, Issue 2 in 2005, this version of Iron Man is also entangled with Victor Von Doom, but in a very different narrative from the one from Earth 11029. Iron Maniac, who hails from Earth 5012, comes from an Earth that was ravaged by war, with many heroes dying as a result. Because of his allies and friends dying, Stark became more violent in his grief. He's got major beef with the Reed Richards of this world. While we never fully know what he blames Reed for, it's implied that Reed's actions caused several deaths. Stark sees him as a psychopath, and because of this, Stark would adopt armor that looked a whole lot like Dr. Doom's. And he even fought against the Fantastic Four. He actually killed the Human Torch, who, in the process, burnt his face. See the Doom relation there? Richards would then dispose of Stark by sending him to the 616 universe, where he encountered the 616 Fantastic Four, who mistook him for Dr. Doom returning. Stark revealed his identity, then posed as the 616 Iron Man, and despite being captured by Captain America, Black Widow, Spider-Man, and X-23, he would go on a new rampage, until he was finally stopped by the hero Freedom Ring, who sacrificed his life to put an end to Tony's reign of terror. And last but not least, in at number 1, Marvel Zombies. Ah, Marvel Zombies, a staple in our top 10 scary alternate lists. Because hey, when your favorite superheroes become decomposing flesh and want to eat up all of humanity, you bet your butt we consider that horrifying. But let's backtrack for a sec here. The Marvel Zombies universe is Earth 2149, a place that was infected thanks to an alternate version of Sentry who carried the infection and punched his way into this reality and infected everyone. This version of Stark was working on a teleportation device that could help those uninfected in this reality escape to another. But unfortunately, a zombified version of the Fantastic Four broke into the lab where Stark was, and Stark was not wearing his Iron Man suit at the time, so he got infected. As a zombie, Stark led the charge against Silver Surfer when Silver Surfer arrived in New York. Despite Surfer blasting Stark's legs off, he and other zombified characters attacked the Surfer and then were imbued with the power cosmic after consuming him. Along with the other power cosmic zombies, Stark would devour Galactus after attacking him with a gun-like contraption that combined all of their powers into one beam. And yeah, they ate Galactus, and gained his powers, and then called themselves the Zombie Galacti. Eventually, Stark would build cybernetic limbs to replace his legs, reverting to his original costume despite being a zombie. I don't know about you guys, but a zombie with that much power is one that I could definitely do without. Starting us off in at number 10, Hyena. What's scarier than the Joker? Well, how about a Joker combined with a homicidal beast of a villain known for his gruesome behavior? Enter Hyena from the Amalgam Universe, an alternate Earth that combines both Marvel and DC characters, merging them into one another. Hyena is the amalgamation of the Joker and Sabretooth from Marvel, with their stories being a very much intertwined origin story. He fell into some acid. And he's the greatest foe of Darkbot, the amalgamation of Batman and Wolverine, if that wasn't already a given. Hyena's real name is Creed Quinn, and along with Logan Wayne, he was a subject chosen to be part of the Weapon X program. Compared to Logan though, Creed fully dived into the idea of being a living weapon, embracing it and becoming a remorseless and psychopathic killer obsessed with murdering Darkclaw. Up next, number 9, Batman Bloodstorm. Bloodstorm is an Elseworlds title that's actually a sequel to Batman and Dracula Red Reign. As you can imagine, is a story where vampires are very much involved. Taking place on Earth 43, Bloodstorm sees the Joker become the leader of a group of vampires after said group's original leader, Dracula, was killed off in the previous story. With this newfound gang, the Joker manages to take control of all the major crime families in Gotham, prompting the vampire Batman and the werecat Selina Kyle to go after him. Unfortunately, Selina dies in the conflict, so Batman loses his crap and then gives into his bloodlust, drinking from the Joker. He doesn't turn the Joker into a vampire though. Instead, he kills him, and because of it, Batman is tormented by the knowledge that the Joker won, driving him to finally kill. Speaking of killing, that brings us to our number 8, Earth 2's Joker. Earth 2 is the reality in which all of DC's Golden Age heroes were retroactively allocated after Crisis on Infinite Earths. As such, the Joker of this reality has aged quite a bit, and it's implied that he is the one who killed Bruce Wayne in this reality. If this is true, this is the only known Joker to have actually murdered Bruce Wayne, and that's pretty terrifying. While his battle against Batman continues by fighting off his successors, post-52, this Joker is depicted as a frail old man, wheelchair-bound thanks to a lifetime of exposure to deadly chemicals. And ironically enough, he's unable to laugh without physically hurting himself. Talk about justice. Speaking of justice, in at number 7, Digital Justice. The Digital Justice version of the Joker is a bit of a double whammy, and represents a different kind of terror that, in our technologically savvy reality, hits home in a way that's unique compared to the other Jokers on this list. The Joker from this story dies of old age, but not without leaving behind a legacy, and that legacy is something called the Joker virus, a sentient digital virus whose purpose was to carry on the Joker's work after he died. It's self-aware, and it claims to be a reincarnation of the original Joker. Now, the virus would go on to control most of human technology thanks to society's reliance on it, and a corrupt Gotham government. Its reign of terror is what pushed James Gordon II to become the Batman of this universe known as the Bat. And in order to stop it, he used something called the Batcom, a program created by the original Batman in order to eliminate threats like these. The story ends with the Joker virus and Batcom fighting it out digitally in a net mainframe until both completely delete their software. How very reboot. And while the visuals that depict said virus may be a little cheesy, the implications of its power is something we can easily wrap our heads around and fear. Up next, number 6, Martha Wayne. This one takes us to the Flashpoint universe, an altered timeline visited by the Flash in which his mother Nora is alive and his father Henry isn't. But that isn't the only difference between the regular universe and this reality. Flashpoint doesn't have a Justice League, or a Superman, or a Flash. As such, many of the characters we know and love in the DC universe have severely altered narratives. For example, Bruce Wayne is not Batman, which brings us to this alternate. On the night that Bruce's parents were supposed to be gunned down, the events played out differently in the Flashpoint universe, with the young Bruce being killed off instead. This pushed his father Thomas Wayne into becoming Batman and his mother Martha Wayne to devolve into becoming the Joker, and now they are each other's mortal enemy. Pretty freaky. Up next at number 5, Marvel's 1602's Carnage. Candice Cassidy is the host of Carnage from the 1602 universe, a timeline that takes place on Earth 311 and is set in the year 1602. Primarily primarily in Europe. Cassidy is possessed by a symbiotic demon called Carnage, and as she puts it in a very 1602 fashion, I quote, "I've got a demon in me no sacred place can quiet." Carnage would become the leader of the Sinister Sextet, which was made up of Electro and the 311 versions of Mysterio and Kraven, along with a character called Serpent who was very similar to Lizard. They were defeated while robbing a cathedral by the Warriors of the Great Web, a group of dimension-hopping Spider-Man heroes from alternate Earths. The reason why this Carnage appears on our list is, well, I mean, kind of reminds us of The Exorcist, so demon Carnage in a Cassidy who's, no fun and likes criminal activity? I think I'll pass on that one.
In at number 4, Earth 4126. This symbiote is known only as Red at first. I don't know, something about that is just chilling. Red is the color of blood after all, and I'm stating the obvious, so all fear has left you now. This Carnage has an intriguing origin. Its creation was ordered by Director of S.H.I.E.L.D. Phil Coulson, as he wanted their own version of the Venom symbiote, but one under their control so they could take down Venom if they had to. So they mixed some of Venom with some of Spider-Man's blood, and boom, Carnage. Then they tortured it. It's always a sound tactic in comics, guaranteed to come to only good. Through this torture, it learned to live only off of hate and revenge. It escapes like Venom did in the Tom Hardy masterpiece of a film. Am I being sarcastic? You'll never know. It then seeks out this world's John Jameson, cause here he's full of hate and rage. Just so few good things happen to John Jameson. Bad things from being J. Jonah's son. This Carnage is out for blood, but honestly, with good reason.
Up next at number 3, the MC2 Carnage. The MC2 is an alternate Earth in which the Age of Heroes started 15 years earlier than it did on Earth 616. The Age of Heroes being generally marked by when the Fantastic Four first hit the scene in the comics. So on this alternate Earth, many of the heroes we know and love have retired, and a new generation of heroes have stepped up. So where does that leave our buddy old pal Carnage? Well, on this Earth, he's known as Specimen 297 and bonds with the friend of the next-gen Spider-Man, Spider-Girl. Her friend is Moose, who wanted to use Carnage as a means of curing his father's cancer. Here's where it gets real weird and freaky though. While all this is going on, Spider-Girl's little brother is also infected by the symbiote, which turns him into a miniature Carnage. I don't know about you guys, but a mini Carnage is straight up nightmare fuel. Imagine it like running around and stuff? Nah, that's scary. That nightmare quickly comes to an end though when Spider-Girl manages to use sonic blasters from one of her villains to destroy Carnage. And eventually her little brother is de-bonded, so whew. That's a relief.
Number 2, Crossover Carnage. So this Carnage appeared in the Batman and Spider-Man crossover story Distorted Minds. It follows a long if not frequent history of crossover comics between the two companies. This started with the Superman vs. the Amazing Spider-Man comic back in 1976. This comic we're talking about today comes to us from 1995 and features both Carnage and the Joker, which is interesting because Cletus Cassidy was modeled off of the Joker, so seeing them together is surreal at points. In this storyline, a behavioral psychiatrist, Cassandra Breyer, she comes up with a behavior modification chip that will curb the homicidal tendencies of those who it is implanted in, permanently rendering them docile. So somebody watched A Clockwork Orange basically, only this version has computer chips. Carnage undergoes the treatment, but it doesn't work, cause she completely forgets, oh right, alien symbiote. So Carnage shorts it out right after it was installed. No, Cletus was pretending to be cured so he could meet and team up with the Joker. Yeah, that's terrifying. Carnage's goal is to work with the Clown Prince of Crime to create as much carnage as possible. The best part of this comic is how sad Carnage is when the Joker doesn't like him and thinks his ideas and motivations are lame. Beautiful.
And last but not least, in at number 1, we have Red Goblin. So Red Goblin isn't just an alternate of Carnage, it is an alternate of Norman Osborn's Green Goblin combined with Carnage. Let that sink in for a sec. Yeah, terrifying. It's two of Spider-Man's deadliest foes as one. How did this horrific amalgamation occur? Well, for starters, it happened on 616, so technically you could say Osborn was just one of Carnage's regular hosts, but this creation is too scary to not include on our list. After the events of Secret Empire, you know, the one where alternate Cap runs Hydra and is a Nazi, Carnage, who was held at a S.H.I.E.L.D. facility, was stolen by Osborn, who at the time was powerless. Bonding with it, he was a little overwhelmed by Carnage's desire for slaughter, but eventually he persuaded it to let him take the wheel, with the promise of letting it indulge in a way that wasn't just boring, mindless killing, so sophisticated killing. Using the Goblin Serum, Osborn becomes the Red Goblin, and with the combination of both villains' powers, he's able to defeat the likes of the Human Torch, Miles Morales, Agent Anti-Venom, and more. Eventually, Carnage is blown up thanks to Spider-Man when he hits it with an exploding gas tank, leaving Norman Osborn's mind totally fried. Or at least it seems that way.